Hello, my name is Bree, and I'd like to welcome you to my channel, Breezy Banter, the place where I talk about the things I want to talk about. In today's video, I'm really excited because I'm doing a personal finance video and I'm talking about the way in which I allocate my paycheck and basically what I do when my paycheck hits in my bank. So to start with, I'll give a summary of kind of my financial situation as it is now. I don't have any debt. I've never had any debt. I've been very fortunate to have been able to avoid that throughout my lifetime. Part of this has to do with the fact that I'm Canadian, so one of the biggest reasons that people are in debt, particularly at a younger age, is due to student loans. However, because I am Canadian and I went to school in Canada, my tuition was much lower, and I worked for 3 years prior to going to university, so I had fairly substantial savings to help myself. In addition to that, I also had some scholarships when I went to university, and my parents helped me with some of my living expenses as well. So I left university with no student debt. So that was a great start for myself. And I fully recognize that's not the case for everyone. If you're watching this video and you're looking for debt advice, unfortunately, I can't be the person to give that to you. I do have my thoughts on it because I've discussed with friends who have debt and based on the things that I've read, the things that I've researched, I feel like I do have some good ideas in this space about how best to handle it, but that's not what I'm going to be talking about in this video. Currently, my fixed expenses comes out to around $12.50 a month. That includes rent for my apartment, internet for my apartment, and my phone plan. And then my expenses on top of that tend to range anywhere between about $750 to $1,000 a month. So that amount can vary. That's just an average, of course. If it tends to be higher than $1,000, that probably means that I bought plane tickets somewhere, or perhaps it's around Christmas time and I was buying gifts for people. I might have had to pay tuition, which I'll talk about in greater detail in this video. But then, of course, I sometimes have lower spend months as well. For example, July was a very low spend month for myself. I think I only spent like a couple $100, so far less than the $750 that I mentioned previously. But I think if you look at my overall spending over the course of a year, it averages out to around that amount. Then in terms of my salary, I make $150,000 at my job. I am eligible for a bonus, which can vary each year. Last year, I got a 22% bonus. This year, I'm eligible for a 30% bonus. I joined the company that I work for just shy of a year ago, so that was the first bonus that I've ever had in my career, because prior to that, I worked for the government and they don't do bonuses. And what I learned is that taxes take a big chunk of your bonus. I got less than half of what my bonus actually was. So that's just something to keep in mind when I'm discussing these numbers. That can seem like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. I think I have a very healthy salary, and my expenses are definitely on the lower side. Like, I'm averaging about $2,000 to $2,250 a month in terms of expenses, whereas my net income is around $8,600. So when I say $8,600, I mean $8,600 is deposited into my account. So $8,600 minus, let's say $2,500. Let's round down. $8,500 minus $2,500 is a difference of about $6,000. So each month I have a net of around, probably on average, about $6,000. So that kind of provides the context for where I'm going with this. So about a year ago, I was talking to a friend about personal finance, and I had said that the vast majority of the money that I invested thus far was in mutual funds with a bank. And in discussing with that friend, they indicated that perhaps that's not best for me because I had a very, let's say, casual approach to investing. Each month, there was an automatic investment that my bank made on my behalf into a mutual fund. And then maybe once or twice a year, I might call them to say, hey, I want to top up this investment account. Can we move over $5,000? Something like that. And so there was really only, I would say, 15 or so transactions that would occur in my account each year. And for mutual funds charge a higher fee than a lot of other options. There are some options that they charge far less than, but in terms of what I was doing and in terms of my timeline and horizon and all of that, my friend said, like, maybe mutual funds aren't really what's best for you. And the reason for this is because mutual funds charge a MER, which is a management expense ratio. And generally speaking, the advice that I've seen is that if it's under 2%, that's probably okay. There are some mutual funds that can go above that 2%, but on average, you're probably looking at about 1.2 to 2%. And what that means is say the market had a great year and it returned 10%. If you're invested in a mutual fund that has a 2% MER, then that 10% gain now becomes 8%. And that might not seem like a big deal, but you can run the calculations yourself and see that depending on the numbers, and if you're doing this over the course of, say, your career, like your working life, so roughly 40 years, it can go into the millions. And that was pretty shocking to me to hear and to think about and to actually run the numbers and see that that is the case. And so I started looking at other options that might be available to me. And so my friend said that through their bank, they had like their own self-driven investment account. And so I started looking to see what may be available to me in Canada. This friend is in the US. So that explains some of the difference as well. And what I found when I started doing this is that some of the bigger banks, say BMO, Bank of Montreal, RBC, Royal Bank of Canada, etc., like the big 5 banks, they might have the option to allow you to trade ETFs, which are exchange traded funds. And ETFs have a much lower, tend to have a much lower expense ratio than mutual funds. ETFs, at least in my experience, what I've seen is maybe as low as like 0.03%, perhaps up to 0.6%. But there's, for the most part, what I've seen is that most ETFs charge around 0.1 to 0.25%. And so that difference in fee between a mutual fund where you could spend close to 2% and an ETF where you could spend almost nothing, like 0.03%, that adds up over time. I forgot to mention this earlier, but the mutual funds that I had, I believe one of the fees was around 1.8. I think there was one that was 1.26, and I think there was one that was 1.18, if I'm remembering correctly. So as I was doing my research, there were certain questions that I was asking myself. How comfortable am I managing my own money? How complicated do I want this to be? How complicated are my finances currently? Things like that. And my general conclusion is that my finances are not complicated. I make a handful of transactions a year, and I'm willing and able to do research to reduce the expense ratio that I'm paying someone for. So this led me to eventually find Wealthsimple, which is a Canadian investment management service, basically. So my understanding is, I should have said this up front, I'm not a financial planner, I'm not a financial advisor, this is not financial advice, this is just what I do and what my experience is. Happy to talk about that. So do your own research, all of that. So I eventually stumbled upon Wealthsimple, and basically everything that I had heard is they're great. And so they're not a bank my understanding is a bank, quote unquote, has like a legal meaning within Canadian law. And so they're not a bank, they're an online management service company. As I was discussing with my friend, they had pointed me in the direction of, I think, 3 funds that they were currently investing in. And we kind of talked about those in detail. And then I found the comparable ones that I could buy via Wealthsimple. And when I started to run the calculations, the amount of savings that I found that I could get by doing this myself were astronomical. On top of that, Wealthsimple has the ability to allow you to automate a lot of this work, which means like once you set it up, you're one and done. You don't have to do anything beyond maybe checking it every once in a while. I'll also say this, I'm not affiliated or sponsored or anything like that with Wealthsimple. I do think they're a great company, and I'm really happy to be a customer of theirs as I'm on my financial journey, but I'm not being paid to say any of this. So after I concluded my research, I decided to move all of my money from my bank over to Wealthsimple. There's a process that you have to follow to do that. Because I had mutual funds and I was going to be investing in ETFs, I was not able to do an in-kind transfer. So all of the money that I took out of my bank was taxed as capital gains in the year 2023, or the tax year 2023, which was not fun. But that being said, I'm very glad to have done it. It would have been taxed now, or it would have been taxed years down the road when I took it out, either way. So it's not like I'm net negative for making this change. It's just that I'm feeling the I felt the tax implications in 2023 as opposed to perhaps if I would have taken it out like 4 years from now when I hope to be retired. And that process can take several weeks. I believe in my case it took maybe 3.5 weeks or so. And I also changed over like my direct deposit and whatnot over to Wealthsimple as well. I've been using the platform now for about 9 months and I love using it. So now that all of that has been said, let me talk about what I do when my paycheck actually lands in my account. So as I mentioned earlier, my expenses tend to be around $2,000 to $2,250 a month. Ease of mind, what happens when my paycheck lands in my cash account, which is basically like a checking account, is I ensure that there is $2,500 in there all the time. And that covers my necessities, rent, internet, my phone, food, and it covers it on the higher end of things. And what that means is my rent is automatically taken out of that same account. So I know that I'm provided, I always top it up, I'm covered. So for example, September 1st will be coming up, that's when my rent is due. My landlord will take the rent out of my account, so I'll be down around $1,086, I believe. And so the next paycheck that happens, I'm gonna top that money up to make sure I hit that $2,500 level. Then within the Wealthsimple app, as I described earlier, you can auto invest your pay. And what that means is every time you get a direct deposit, you can tell the app, I want to invest this amount of money in this particular stock, for example, or ETF, as is my case, each paycheck. And you can change the amount. You can choose multiple funds if you so please. And so that's what I do. Each paycheck, up until around July, I was investing $1,250 automatically off of each paycheck. And I'll talk about the funds that I have specifically chosen later on in this video. Now I've increased it to $2,000 per paycheck, and I'll talk about why that is. And the main reason for that is because I have maxed out the various investment accounts that you can have as a Canadian. So the three main ones are a TFSA, a tax-free savings account, an FHSA, a first home savings account, and an RRSP, which is a registered retirement savings plan. So the TFSA limit for everyone is $7,000 in the year 2024. That number changes. I believe it increases with inflation, basically. And a TFSA is great because your gains in that account are tax exempt. And the next account that I topped up is the FHSA, which is a maximum of $40,000 over the course of 5 years, up to a maximum of $8,000 per year. And the great thing about an FHSA is that it reduces your taxable income. So I maxed out that $8,000 as well earlier this year. And then on top of that is the RRSP, which this year I had just over $17,000 that I could contribute to my RRSP. And so I've hit that limit and I can no longer contribute to it for this year. And when I'm talking about when my paycheck hits now, I'm talking about now in particular. I'll also mention what happens earlier in the year when I still have contribution room for my TFSA and my FHSA and my RRSP. But so when my paycheck hits, I have that automatic investment that happens. So if you remember at the beginning of this video, I said that there's about $6,000. There's about a $6,000 difference between my income and my expenses. And then when you take into account the $2,000 per paycheck, what that means is there's really about $2,000 extra dollars each month that I have to move around. And what I do with that money is I take a forward look at what I'm saving for. So for example, in the short term, I want to take a nice vacation. So that's something that I can put my money towards. I also want to build a very nice high-end PC. And that's something else that I can put my money towards. I have to pay tuition, which is then reimbursed by my company. And because I'm just starting my master's, I'm basically a cycle behind. So this will only be something that I have to consider up until I get my first reimbursement, which should happen in about a month or a month and a half. But for the time being, I've paid one semester of tuition. I should get reimbursed within about a month, but before that time, there's one more term, or there's one more semester that I'm going to have to pay tuition for. And then once I get reimbursed from my company for that first semester, I'm going to put that money into a fund for the upcoming semesters. It's just a bit of a weird time because there's that delay at this point. But going forward, that money should just be, as soon as I receive it from my company, it gets put into a separate fund. But for the time, so I have a rough idea of how much these things will cost. I know that the PC that I plan on building will likely be around $3,500. The one trip that I'm like 98% certain I'll go on this year is to Mexico, and I suspect that will be around $2,500. And I plan on doing another trip, but I'm still kind of thinking about where I want to go, how long I want to be there for, so that's a bit up in the air. But these are things in the back of my mind that I think about, and I don't invest this money because it's on such a short-term horizon for myself. On top of that, Wealthsimple, because I'm like their top tier as a client, I get currently it's a 4.5% interest rate on the money that I have in a cash account, which is, to me, that's good enough for the short term. So that's what I do currently. Earlier in the year, if I haven't maxed out my FHSA, if I haven't maxed out my TFSA, and if I still have contribution room for my RRSP, then any of that extra money goes to those accounts first. I really want to maximize those things as much as possible early on in the year, so that for the rest of the year, I know that the money that I have coming in is really mine to decide what to do with. And then once everything's accounted for, if I know I have enough money for the PC that I want to build, if I know I have enough money for the vacation I want to take, if I know I've maxed out my various investment vehicles, then I'll invest the remaining money, basically. So when I started doing research into Wealthsimple and the funds that I wanted to invest in, I eventually landed on 3. So I did do a fair amount of research. There were, I'm making this number up, but perhaps around 50 ETFs that I thought might be a good choice, and I eventually wanted to narrow it down. ETFs are really intended to be kind of an all-in-one fund. I didn't want there to be like 10 ETFs that I was buying every time I decided to buy something. And so up until July, so there were 3 ETFs that I was investing in, and the tickers for them are VEQT, which is the Vanguard All Equity ETF portfolio. This is a 100% like stock fund, basically. And I invested 20% of my investments into that ticker. The next is VGROW, which is the Vanguard Growth ETF portfolio. And this fund included 80% stocks and 20% bonds. And I was investing 40% into this ticker. And next is VFB, which is the Vanguard S&P 500 Index ETF. And for this one, I was also investing 40% of my investments into. And so after doing a bit more research, I recently decided to stop investing the 40% that I was investing in VGROW and distribute it to the VFE and VEQT funds. And the reason for this is, as I mentioned much earlier in this video, I previously worked for the government. And what that means is when I left, I had a very specific pension plan that will pay me a certain amount when I retire. And it's guaranteed. It cannot change. I am legally guaranteed that money. And what that meant to me was that I'm at a time in my life where most of the things that I want to buy are either discretionary, so I don't need them, and on the very short term time horizon, for example, a vacation. But what that meant was that the things that I'm thinking about longer term, like buying a house or planning for retirement, those are on a longer time frame. And so I'm more comfortable having more risk in my portfolio at this point in time in my life. And so I just wanted to be more aggressive. And so I didn't want to have a ETF that was 80% stock and 20% bonds. I just wanted just straight stock. And so that means that currently I invest 50% of my investment money into VFE, 50% of my investment money into VEQT. And I will say, you have to be able to stomach market fluctuations. I have a lot of money invested, and so if the stock market changes by 8%, it's a lot. It can be a huge gain, but it can also be a huge loss. And as we saw last week, I lost like $40,000 over the course of the week because the stock market kind of tanked for that week. But stock markets have largely recovered, and so my money is basically back where it was 2 weeks ago. Yeah. If you're the type of person to see that dip in the market and freak out, then this approach will not work for you. If you're like me and you're basically buying it and forgetting about it, I think this is a great approach. So I invest in these two ETFs automatically via the Wealthsimple app when my paycheck lands in my account. But then when I make contributions on my own to my TFSA, my RRSP, or my FHSA, I divvy the money up still with the 50-50 split. I will say that you can also, I currently have my Wealthsimple account just funding a non-registered investment account. But earlier in the year, when I'm still funding my FHSA, my TFSA, my RRSP, you can set that up to also be automatically deducted from your paycheck. I was previously doing that. I just stopped those contributions because I hit my contribution max. And so far, I have to say that I kind of love my process. I think it's very simple. As the name Wealthsimple would imply, it's simple, it's straightforward. I don't have to think much about it. Most of the work that went into this was deciding which ETFs I thought were most appropriate for me, reevaluating based on my risk level, the market types that I wanted to get into, and you can decide for yourself if you want to invest more in, say, emerging markets. You're probably not going to invest in the VFE portfolio, which tracks the S&P 500. There are ETFs that will allow you to do that. If you want to have a strictly US-based ETF, there are many that will allow you to do that. If you want to buy an ETF that just purchases individual stocks from the Magnificent Seven, you can also do that. Like, there are so many ETFs that come pre-packaged based on what you want that you can really find what's correct for you. I don't want to bemoan mutual funds. I think I got started with mutual funds and I did see good returns. It hurts a little bit now to think that I could have been up like 1.7-ish% had I started with ETFs. But of course, maybe I wouldn't have made the right decision when I was first starting. So I don't know that. I learned my lesson. It's not like it was an awful decision. I just could have made a even more optimized decision. But after talking with my friend, after doing my research, I think I found a solution that's really great, and thus far I'm really happy. So I'm very comfortable with the setup that I have now and with my risk level. I know, as I just witnessed, that I'm okay seeing those huge market dips in return for larger returns. And I have a secure job. I have an emergency fund. I didn't mention that in this video, but I have an emergency fund in another bank, like a Big Five bank. So if I need to access my money very quickly, I'm able to do that. But I also just have a very secure job that pays me quite well. I get bonuses, I get pay raises. I think the market forecast for my industry is quite good. I'm an engineer, so it's not like engineers can't be without work. I just don't foresee that happening for myself, particularly for my skill set, which is specialized and highly technical and a mix of multiple fields, which just means that it's difficult to train people for the type of position that I have. And so that means it's in higher demand, and then subsequently pays well too. So what I'm going to do, and what I have been doing, is including a Wealthsimple referral link, which is available to literally everyone who has a Wealthsimple account. You get $25 if you fund any Wealthsimple account and use my code, and then we'll both get our reward boosted to $250 if you become a premium client within, I believe, 30 days. Premium means you have at least 100K invested, and we'll both get $1,000 if you reach generation status, which means you have $500,000 invested. Wealthsimple currently has a great promotion on right now. They're doing a 1% match for all funds that you bring over. When I transferred my money, there was a 0.5% match, and I think 1% is the highest I've ever seen. I'm happy that I got the 0.5% match. I would have missed out on like the past 9 months of market gains had I not invested, had I waited for this particular promotion. But just that to say, even if you don't use my referral code, you stand to make a decent chunk of money if you do move your funds over to Wealthsimple. So that's just something to consider. So at this point in time, like I said, I'm happy with what I have. I'm still learning. Perhaps this isn't the most optimized solution for my current situation. I recently made that change to stop investing in the VGrow ETF because of what I had thought about regarding my pension from my service in the government. But all of that to say, this, like, the way that I handle my finances can and likely will change, particularly if I do make a big purchase such as a house. But this is what I'm doing now, and so far I've just been really happy with the results that I have. So if you like this video, I hope you'll like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. If you want to do more than that, I'll have a few links in the description that you can use to support me further. And of course, I'll also have the referral link to Wealthsimple if you wish to consider using Wealthsimple in the future for your financials. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. What is your current investment strategy for long-term financial success? And before I go, I'd like to take a second to thank you for taking time out of your day to spend watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Thanks. Bye.